Hello everyone, welcome to the LA Lim channel on YouTube. I thank you all so much for supporting my channel and watching my video, and welcome to episode 5 of my weekly series called The Greatest Albums of All Time. During this weekly series, I profile one album each week and talk about its legacy, its cultural significance, and how the project started and from where it came from, and so on. In the first 4 episodes, I profiled Marvin Gaye's landmark album, What's Going On, from 1971. The Beatles' 1967 epic album, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, also from 1967. In episode 3, I profiled the Temptations' classic album, With a Lot of Soul. And last week, I profiled in episode 4 the great album from 40 years ago, an album called Rumors by Fleetwood Mac. Well, today in episode 5, I'm going to profile my favorite album of all time. And it was recorded by my favorite group of all time. And if you know LA Lim, you already know who that is. That's right, I'm talking about the elements of the universe: Earth, Wind, and Fire. All recording acts all have an evolution that they start with, where they are building their audience and building their momentum through record sales and concert appearances. Most recording acts take them a while to get going. Every once in a while you have your one-hit wonders who come out big, 6 months later, never hear from them again. And then sometimes you may have a recording act that comes out big and stays out big. But for the most part, most recording acts, it takes them a while to find themselves as they build their momentum through their recordings. And Earth, Wind, and Fire's breakthrough album, which they began recording in late 1974, was called That's the Way of the World. Sig Shore, who was a producer and director in the blaxploitation era of the 70s, produced and directed a film in 1973 called Superfly. And Superfly was a big hit in the United States, starring the great Ron O'Neal. His next project was a project called That's the Way of the World, the story of a record label who had a band who was trying to break through, but they were also trying to promote a teenage group and make them stars as well. And in doing so, didn't pay attention to the band with the true talent. Sig Shore approached Maurice White and asked him if he would record a soundtrack album to the movie That's the Way of the World, in which Maurice White agreed to do that. Bob Cavallo, Cavallo Ruffalo Management, Earth, Wind, and Fire's management, went to Maurice White, and as Maurice described in his book, My Life with Earth, Wind, and Fire, Bob said to Maurice, "This has got to be the one, pal." And boy, was it ever. They began recording it in late 1974, and the aggregation of that group that went through lineup and personnel changes that formed the basis of the group that became the biggest and baddest band of the latter half of the 70s included Fred White on drums, Andrew Woolfolk on saxophone, Johnny Graham on guitars, Ralph Johnson on drums, Al McKay on lead and rhythm guitar, Larry Dunn on piano and synthesizer, Philip Bailey on vocals and congos, Verdine White on bass, and Maurice White, the leader of Earth, Wind, and Fire, founder of Earth, Wind, and Fire, on drums, and kalimba, timbales, and of course lead vocals. And in partnership with the co-pilot of the great album That's the Way of the World, the great legendary producer Charles Stepney, they recorded and crafted an album that would become their breakthrough album and become the biggest selling R&B album of 1975. That album, as the great young musicians came together and reached their apex, as far as their talent as musicians was also augmented by the great songwriting of Al McKay, Larry Dunn, Philip Bailey, Verdine White, and Maurice White. In fact, Larry Dunn and Philip Bailey, both from Denver, you could say really hit their stride and reached their maturity in 1975, but together they both collaborated on 5 of the 8 songs on That's the Way of the World. The debut single of That's the Way of the World was the song called Shining Star. Shining Star was Earth, Wind & Fire's first big hit on the pop charts, their first big top 40 hit, their first big top 20 hits, and their first and only song to reach #1 on the Billboard pop charts. Shining Star, written by Maurice White, Philip Bailey, and Larry Dunn. As Maurice put it in his book, My Life with Earth, Wind & Fire, for him, Philip and Larry, writing Shining Star was easy because they knew who Earth, Wind & Fire was. Shining Star became a massively big pop-selling record throughout 1975, and it paved the way for the album to follow, That's the Way of the World. Reasons, the great ballad on that song, which showcased the great falsetto of Philip Bailey, is not only one of their greatest ballad songs, one of the great ballads of the 70s, but probably Earth, Wind & Fire's most misunderstood song. And if you read either Maurice White's or Philip Bailey's book, or just read the lyrics, you will see how many people, including myself, misunderstood what Philip was saying in the great lyrics of that song. Africano, their instrumental composition on that song, was the first or the one that really launched them as far as their great instrumental work and set them apart from the other bands of that era because of their great instrumental talent, in addition to the great soaring vocal collaborations of Maurice White and Philip Bailey. And then, of course, there is the anchor to the album, the title song, That's the Way of the World, which holds a special place in my heart and Maurice White's heart as my favorite Earth, Wind & Fire song and my favorite song of all time. Written by Maurice White, Verdine White, and Charles Stepney, and with Charles' lush instrumental and string arrangements, That's the Way of the World was the pinnacle for which all of the other songs that Earth, Wind & Fire ever recorded was judged by. And besides the great vocal collaboration and trade-off between Maurice White and Philip Bailey, at the end of the song, it is as if Maurice White is singing directly to us. As he says, when Philip says, "Child is born," and Maurice White says, "Listen now, with a heart of gold," it's as if he's singing directly to us. And from that point, that album, released in this early spring of 1975, became Earth, Wind & Fire's first album to reach #1 on the Billboard and Cashbox record charts. In fact, Earth, Wind & Fire has the record. They are in the Guinness Book of World Records for being the first black recording act to simultaneously hold the #1 album and #1 single on the Billboard pop charts. That date being May 24th, 1975, where Shining Star was the #1 single in the country, and That's the Way of the World was the #1 album in the country. As I said, That's the Way of the World ranked as the #1 selling album on the Billboard R&B charts and was the #3 selling album overall of 1975, only being beaten by Elton John's album Captain Fantastic and the Brown Dirt Cowboy, a great album in itself. That's the Way of the World, of course, was the beginning of an unprecedented streak of great albums through the end of the 70s, which put Earth, Wind & Fire at the top of the greatest, best bands of the 70s. They were released from that point on. They released other great albums. And as many of my Earth, Wind & Fire brethren many of us all have our favorite albums. But my favorite album of all time, and my favorite album by Earth, Wind & Fire, is 1975's That's the Way of the World. Maurice White, in his infinite wisdom, realizing that the movie That's the Way of the World was going to bomb at the box office, very wisely made sure that that album stood alone as an album and not being seen as a soundtrack album and being linked to the very bad fortune of the movie That's the Way of the World. Indeed, few people refer to that album as a soundtrack album, and that's because the brilliant business wisdom of Maurice White to make that a standalone album apart from the movie That's the Way of the World. Of course, That's the Way of the World, as I said, led to their other great albums, Gratitude, Spirit, All in All. The list goes on and on. But on this week, episode 5, I am profiling That's the Way of the World, released in 1975 by Earth, Wind & Fire, as one of the greatest albums of all time. Thank you so much for watching this episode 5. I invite your comments. Please let me know what you have to say about this, whether you agree, whether you disagree. Let me know what you think of the album That's the Way of the World. It's a great album. As always, I wish you all, I would like to say to you all, love is life. That is my saying. That's how I feel. Show some love. Be a blessing to someone today. Give a hug to someone today. Tell them you love them. This is L.A. Lim saying ciao bella. Ciao.